Good morning, everyone. Please be seated. I think I might. Welcome to this meeting of Perth Kinross Council. A particular welcome to those joining us in the chamber and those online as well, and members of the public viewing. It is expected that we will break around about 12:30 for lunch today after the consideration of the first part of revenue budget motion and amendments, and then there will be a 2-hour recess which will include the lunch break, and then we'll return this afternoon to consider the consideration of those motion and amendments. I'm going to invite the clerk to take a roll call and intimate any apologies.
Thank you, Provost. Good morning, everyone. I have no formal apologies submitted, and I believe all elected members are present in the chambers unless there are any online.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, we will shortly move to declarations of interest, but before we do so, I just wanted to mark on behalf of the council our respects for the person who lost their life yesterday at the recycling centre locally, and our thoughts are with their family and indeed the person and family of the person who's injured and in hospital at this moment. So just on behalf of the council, wanted to mark that. I also wanted to mark that Friday past was a year since the invasion of Ukraine, and indeed it is a year almost since this council marked its support for the people of Ukraine due to the unwarranted invasion of their country. And I think it's important to mark that we still stand fully behind them and welcome the many refugees that have sought to make Perth Kinross their home while their country is under threat. And the Deputy Provost spoke at an event on Friday to mark that. We now move on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest in respect of today's business? Seeing no intimations. Therefore, members, we move on to item 3, which is the strategic planning update and the 2023-26 General Revenue Fund budget. And the Chief Executive is going to introduce the report, followed by the Head of Finance.
Thank you, Provost. Good morning, members. My comments will be brief and will cover 3 areas. Firstly, I would like to issue thanks to members and particularly to those who participated in the BRG process for the way that has been conducted over the last number of months. I think it's been very respectful and a very positive experience for the officer team, and I think it bodes well for the papers that you have in front of you. My second thanks have to go to my own team and to the finance community, to the ELT and extended ELT members who have led the budget process, preparing proposals, providing support and advice to all political groups over the last number of months, and have hopefully contributed to getting us to a place today where we have in front of you a legal and balanced budget proposal from officers. My second comments relate to the structure of the paper. And this is a budget paper, but as others before me have said, it's not any budget paper, it's a PKC budget paper, in that this time you will see some differences in the structure to the paper from previous budget reports that you've seen. It does, as always, seek to reflect the financial context that we as an organisation are facing, and that's well detailed in the appropriate section of the report. But what we've tried to do as officers this year is we've tried to reflect the organisational context that we are currently working within, and will continue to work within over the course of this administration. It will focus on the organisational challenges that we will face in terms of transformation and change programme, which you as Council have previously agreed. It will reflect on some of the workforce challenges that we face, not least the changes in our leadership structure, which we will bring forward over the course of the coming financial year. And it also, particularly in the capital paper later on, looks at our asset base and how we will use it to deliver services to the communities of Perth and Kinross. So it does do what we are required to do in terms of the budget, but I'd like to think that it does more. And as we develop this model of working over future years, we will continue to use this paper to highlight the organisational changes that we are delivering on your behalf and for the people of Perth and Kinross. My final comment relates to the budget element, and I will stay well clear of the clever stuff and leave that to Mr Mackenzie and others to address in his introductions. We have provided you with a legal and balanced budget for your consideration today. Through a process which has sought to reflect the feedback from communities through the budget engagement exercise, and through a process which does not look to favour any particular service, any particular ward area, but seeks to deliver a budget based on the priorities and policies that you have set for us as officers. I hope that this will be my only contribution to today's meeting. I will close now and look forward to sitting back and enjoying the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, and good morning, Provost and Councillors. As the Chief Executive has just noted, the context of this report is the unprecedented pressures on the Council's budget and the wider programme of transformation and change required to ensure the Council can deliver on its priorities in the most challenging financial circumstances it has experienced. And an update on this work is set out in section 5 of the report. The Council's revenue funding in 2023-24 has increased in absolute cash terms by £23.4 million. After adjusting for funding directed towards Scottish Government priorities, the increase in the Council's core grant funding is £6.009 million, or 2.03%, as summarised in Table 4 of the report. And these figures exclude the Council's share of the £100 million recently announced by the Deputy First Minister to support pay awards for non-teaching employees next year. The members will be familiar with unprecedented pressures in the revenue budget from earlier briefings. Section 7 of the report shows the current forecast position over the next 3 years. The provisional revenue budgets and executive summaries, which detail both pressures and proposed budget reductions, are attached at appendices A and B to the report, respectively. The Council has a statutory responsibility to set the balanced budget for the coming financial year. The recurring budget gap, assuming all savings proposals are accepted, is approximately £23.5 billion in 23-24 and £35.8 million over the next 3 years. The Council has previously approved the use of a service concessions arrangement flexibility, and it is proposed to apply a total of £17 million towards the 23-24 budget from this flexibility. The provisional budget has been prepared on the assumption of a 3% increase in council tax each year, as reflected in the medium-term financial plan, and members are asked to approve an assumed council tax collection rate of 98% and the tax-based assumptions set out in Table 9. Full details of other fees and charges for council services are attached at Appendix C to the report. Council is requested to approve the contribution of £79.532 million to the Integration Joint Board in 23-24. This includes the transfer of all uplifts in Scottish Government funding for social care, except for funding towards the cost of a real living wage, which is still to be allocated. Table 11 in the report summarises the overall position. Including Scottish Government funding and assumptions on the use of service concessions and council tax, There is capacity of £2.192 million in the 23-24 provisional budget. This assumes that all the identified budget pressures and all the budget reductions and cuts in 23-24 are accepted. Financial years 24-25 and 25-26 remain out of balance by approximately £3.9 million and £1.5 million respectively. The Council is requested to approve the provisional revenue budget at Appendix A. Section 8 of the report details the proposed reserve strategy. Appendix F shows a projected general fund balance of approximately £53.7 million at the end of the current financial year. The report recommends the earmarking of £38.768 million of reserves for the purposes set out in Table 13 and Appendix G. This would leave a projected uncommitted balance on general fund reserves of approximately £14.9 million, or 3.3% of the net revenue budget. Section 9 of the report sets out significant financial risks to the Council's current and future budget position, including those relating to inflation, future pay awards, and anticipated funding constraints. The budget is also impacted by demographic change, cost of living pressures, and the demands on partner organisations. Considering these risks, I would strongly recommend that members use reserves in a prudent and sustainable manner and maintain, as a minimum, an uncommitted balance of 2% of the 23-24 net revenue budget, equivalent to approximately £8.9 million. I would also remind members that none of the proposals within the executive summaries include any cost of change. And to conclude, Council is asked to determine the final 23-24 revenue budget and council tax, and to set provisional revenue budgets and indicative council tax levels for 24 and 25-26. I appreciate members will be keen to enter debate in the matters before them, but happy with colleagues to take questions, Provost.
Thank you very much, Mr Mackenzie. Do any members have any questions on the report for Mr Mackenzie or any other officers? Okay, if there are no questions, then we shall move on. Thank you, Mr Mackenzie and Chief Executive, for introducing the report. We will now move on to the moving of the report, and I'm going to invite the Leader of the Council to move a motion, and movers and seconders of budget motions get 20 minutes to share between the two of them, and the Deputy Provost is going to be keeping tight time on this, given the pressures of today, and he will give I think a 1 minute warning possibly when we're at 19 minutes. So, Mr Leader, you're welcome to come forward and move your budget.
Back a room here. Okay, thank you, Provost. Provost, I'm honoured to be presenting the first budget of this SNP administration today. Since we were elected, our administration has been clear that we be committed to making a real difference to the lives of the people of Perth and Kinross. From my very first day as leader, I committed to reach across the chamber to ensure that we collectively, as a democratically elected members of Perth and Kinross Council, deliver the best outcomes for our people, our businesses, and the area as a whole. I'd like to thank you for your support today and hope that we continue to work together in the future. It is also a testament to the commitment of both councillors and officers alike that we are here today to determine the council's budget. I would like to record my personal thanks to everyone involved. Provost, this administration has been proactive by listening and understanding the needs of our communities in these times of significant hardship. Our focus over the last 10 months has quite rightly been on supporting our most vulnerable, and we have much to be proud of. In our very first council meeting in May, we applied over £700,000 of funding. £104,000 of that was for food insecurity over the holiday periods, and £600,000 of that was for a new financial inclusion fund to support people struggling to make ends meet. In June, we agreed a financial strategy and a set of principles to put us on a sustainable footing. Linked to this was the transformation and change strategy, which was also approved in June. This set out a 5-year approach and sits within the Council's wider strategic framework as an enabler to deliver on our corporate objectives. In September, we established the Anti-Poverty Task Force. This has brought together Council, local businesses, third sector organisations and communities to work collectively to mitigate the impacts of poverty and the cost of living crisis. To ensure the success of the task force, we allocated £470,000 to support those most in need over the winter period. The medium-term financial plan was also approved in September. This highlighted the scale of the financial challenges we may face over the next few years. In November, we committed a further £100,000 to help people stay warm in their own homes and ensure additional food provision was available in community groups for passing on to those in need. And in December, we agreed the new corporate plan, which provides us all with a clear focus on our 7 approved priorities. I'll come back to these later as part of my budget motion. We also approved the draft strategic priorities for cultural, physical activities and sport. These are important for increasing life chances, for physical and mental well-being, and for the vibrancy and resilience of our communities. Turning back to the business before us today, this is a budget which is designed to be transformative, strategic, and sustainable. Our administration has embraced a 3-year budget approach. Planning over the longer term allows us to take early and hard decisions that will provide clarity to our workforce, our partners, and our communities. It allows us to start transformation early in this administration's term and monitor progress over several years. This is underpinned by one of our driving principles, which is to focus on need rather than demand. Before I present our budget today, it would be remiss of me not to mention the national position. Our planning assumption has been for no increase in Scottish Government funding. I am proud and delighted that our actual funding for next year will increase by almost £30 million. The Council report sets out almost 8% of an increase, and when we receive our living wage and pay allocations, this rises to almost 10%. Many in the Chamber may comment that much of this funding is directed at specific areas. However, this money is for social care, free school meals, living wage, and the wage bill for our dedicated and committed staff. Surely there is nothing in this list that we would not all support. Provost, I'm delighted to bring forward the SNP budget proposals today. These are difficult times for local government. Record levels of inflation, increasing need, and the many pressures on our people and businesses have been well rehearsed. In addition, this budget has been made more challenging as a result of the structural deficit we have inherited. This has left us with an underlying problem of over £10 million, much of which our budget will seek to redress today. Our budget also reflects the priorities within the new corporate plan and support many of the proposals we have already committed to since May. It does not, however, remain a prudent approach. It does, however, remain a prudent approach while still delivering what matters most across the Council as a whole. Our budget does not shy away from making difficult decisions, but we have done our very best to protect the most vulnerable, our partners and our staff. We have challenged expenditure pressures and identified new savings, allowing us to reject savings of over £6.1 million and invest more in our agreed priorities. This includes bringing forward the savings identified for Pooler House, unless there is a clear commitment towards a shared public sector approach. In terms of our first priority, tackling poverty, we are committing over £800,000 in this area, including the £300,000 already identified with the budget report. This will see the creation of a child poverty fund, a small grants fund, and further funding for warm spaces. given the success of this year's commitment. Tackling climate change and supporting sustainable places also remains a clear commitment for the SNP administration. We welcome the land use proposal, which will have a significant impact on our climate change aspirations. In addition, we are providing £75,000 to support biodiversity in our open spaces. Linked to this, we are also rejecting £100,000 of grounds maintenance savings. Reinforcing our commitment further to climate change, we are also investing £250,000 to provide EV charging points at car parks in our rural locations. Reducing the Council's carbon footprint is another key action within our climate change strategy. After discussion with Councillors Water, Liz Barrett and Cuthbert, we are committing to support this with funding of £2 million for decarbonisation projects, including energy efficiency and energy generation measures. This will be funded by savings income realised moving forward. In relation to developing resilient, stronger and greener local economy, we are rejecting £631,000 of proposed savings. This includes a proportion of the events budget, although we are setting an income target to make the provision of these financially sustainable in the future. We are also deferring closure of public toilets for 1 year to allow meaningful discussions with communities about their future operation. We are also maintaining the funding for the Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust. Acknowledging that COVID, inflation and the cost of living crisis is having an impact on our towns as well as Perth, we are also protecting services in this area in order to support businesses and encourage football. This administration is also seeking to further support the local economy, and as such we are adding £300,000 into this priority. This includes funding for Grobus to expand coverage, including rural care provision, and more funding for the highly successful Adapt Your Property scheme. Turning to our commitment to enable our children and young people to achieve their full potential, we are rejecting £870,000 of savings. This includes primary school swimming, music instruction, central groups and music camps, as well as educational psychology services. We have rejected almost all increases in educational charges and are committed to maintaining the existing level of school crossing patrollers by continuing to fund those who are currently in post. These are all areas we know are important to our parents and families. Also recognising the tough time our young people have had in recent years, this administration is providing £100,000 to provide additional study support this Easter. This means that all secondary schools in Perth and Kinross will be open for senior pupils in the period before their exams. Given the success of the virtual campus across secondary schools, not only are we rejecting the savings proposals, we are investing £61,000 to expand the course choice by a further 5 subjects from August 2024. These 2 initiatives will be funded from the underspend as a result of the teachers' industrial action. Over the last 10 months, we have already shown our support for our priority of protecting and caring for our most vulnerable people. We will enhance that further by rejecting £1.236 million of savings. We are protecting the homelessness service, adult literacy and community planning, equality groups including Saints in the Community, Mead and MECOP, and we are also continue support for the criminal justice services. We are also committing an additional £2 million for financial inclusion for those who have been impacted by the cost of living crisis the most. We are well aware of the increasing problems around mental health. As such, we are committed to funding the NUC based in Perth and other mental health groups. In addition, we will provide £75,000 to support the vital work of RASIC, Women's Aid and the Buttons and Bows charity. This means that our administration is investing over £3.25 million to protect the most vulnerable across Perth and Kinross. When it comes to supporting and promoting physical and mental wellbeing, we are maintaining the Council's contribution to our arm's length organisations in the next financial year. including the deferred savings and the provision of 1-year funding for the rural library provision. This amounts to support for all three of £801,000. However, the important services delivered through our ALIOs must be affordable and sustainable. As such, this administration is committed to a review of all three organisations to bring forward savings for financial year 24-25 and beyond. I will be allocating £150,000 to take forward accounts. I will also be allocating £150,000 to take forward a council-wide review of our leisure and cultural assets, another key strand in our drive to protect and make best use of the assets we currently have. The administration recognises the importance of outdoor sports. As a result, we are removing all charges for grass pitches in Perth and Kinross. I believe this will have a huge impact in relation to mental and physical well-being. Our council has a wealth of green space which we are all rightly proud of. We want this to be an area which people continue to visit and residents will enjoy. To make this offer even better and to draw in some extra income, we want and support the benefits already provided by the Cairngorm National Park. We are providing £50,000 to fund a feasibility study to allow the council to make a bid for a new national park within our boundaries. To reinforce the importance of working in partnership with our communities, we are rejecting the savings impacting on winter maintenance, community green space, street cleaning, regulatory services, public transport and reactive roads maintenance and safety. This totals £2.7 million. Recognising the value of local people being involved in local decision making, we are also allocating £600,000 to the Community Investment Fund and local area partnerships for the next financial year. We know that the funding for the Kinross Shire Local Committee is coming to an end. As a result, we will fund £40,000 towards its ongoing work while the review of community engagement is taking place. This administration understands the impact weather events have on all our communities. As such, we are committing £50,000 to provide an enhanced severe weather service. We are also expanding the work of the visitor management team to tackle the problems that include fly tipping and dog fouling. This will be for 1 year while a wider review of community safety and linked activities is undertaken. In consultation with Councillors Waters, Cuthbert and Robertson, I'm delighted to provide funding to maintain the much needed services 55 and 202 for Glenfarg and West Kinross Shire. I'm pleased to announce additional funding of £2 million to enhance the local road network across the area. Provost. In setting the council tax today, we need to strike the balance between the inflationary pressures facing the council and the financial pressures on households. This administration's careful and considered approach to this year's budget has allowed us to restrict the council tax increase to 3.9%. At this time, we understand that this is the lowest council tax increase in mainland Scotland and one of the lowest in the UK. Our prudent approach, along with the increase in Scottish Government funding, has allowed us to reject many savings, protect our workforce and recognise the current needs of our communities by investing in our priority areas. I would also like to pay tribute to the staff of our council. I'm sure you will all want to join me in thanking them as they continue to work tirelessly to support our citizens and communities. The budget invests in our children and families. It invests in our economic well-being. It invests in our communities. It invests in climate change and in our infrastructure. It also minimises the financial impact on all our households with a council tax rise significantly below inflation. It is a budget designed to ensure that our residents and our communities can remain confident in all that our council stands for. It is a budget which focuses on protecting people, protecting jobs and protecting our vital assets. This is the first budget of our SNP administration, and as I have committed to listen to all voices across the chamber since I've been fortunate enough to become leader of this council, I again today will listen to the debate and incorporate into the administration budget those ideas that will enhance our approach, meet our agreed priorities, and make the best use of the resources available to us all. And finally, Provost, on behalf of myself and the SNP colleagues, I commend this budget to the Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Mr. Deputy Leader, would you like to second the budget, and the Deputy Provost will advise on how long? 5 minutes.
Provost, I would like to add some further comments in support of this new SNP administration's first budget since the last election. The Council Leader has already made reference to the extremely challenging budget process we have gone through, and I would certainly agree with that. Let's be clear, this very difficult financial situation arises through a combination of factors. Firstly, there has been so much dither and delay by the previous Scottish Conservative administration at PKC throughout our very long 5 years in opposition, along with a lack of strong leadership and effective decision making. As a result of their failure and procrastination, before we even took the reins, we faced a structural deficit of over £10 million. These weaknesses are not mistakes this SNP administration is prepared to make. To make the budget setting process even harder, thanks in particular to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, we have had to deal with an unprecedented rise in inflation, combined with monumental increases in borrowing costs. Very much of the blame for this pressure can only be laid at the feet of the previous UK Prime Minister and Chancellor. And their catastrophic recklessness with the national economy will continue to have a massive and lasting impact on the lives of the people of Perth and Kinross for many years to come. This SNP budget is seeking to mitigate the havoc the Tory UK government has wreaked, and we are therefore grateful to the Scottish Government for the additional multi-million pounds of funding as set out in the officer's report that it has been able to provide for local government. As a result, we are pleased we have been able to keep the council tax rise to 3.9%, which is the lowest set in mainland Scotland so far. As former chair of the Integration Joint Board, I am pleased that our budget proposals provide £83 million of funding for the Health and Social Care Partnership. In addition, this administration continues our focus on protecting people with early intervention and prevention approaches. We are therefore adding additional funding to mitigate pressures on social care budgets by funding a pilot for health checks for hidden, undiagnosed long-term conditions, including targeted support for unpaid carers. We have also taken an innovative approach by seeking to use as many funding solutions as possible. We are launching a review of single-person council tax discounts to ensure our records are correct. This is expected to yield around £250,000 additional council tax income annually. Looking for efficiencies across all that we do, while also mitigating risks, have been key features of our approach. The impact of inflation on the council has been significant, and that spreads to other organisations. As such, in addition to what the leader has already announced, a review of Tayside contracts is being commissioned, and we shall be working alongside Angus and Dundee City Councils on this important initiative. Our budget proposals also show that we are a listening administration, as the introduction of a freeze on parking permits for residents and the rejection of the removal of large planting containers in Perth city centre show. In listening, we have also rejected many other proposed savings which are important to our residents, as borne out by the responses to the survey recently completed. And given that so many of our residents also make up our workforce, I am delighted that we have been able to absolutely minimise any job losses at this time. Provost, I am very happy to second the SNP administration's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Leader. I'm now going to invite Councillor Duff to move the Conservative Group amendment.
Provost, if I were to look back at previous budget statements made by the leaders of all political groups, I'm sure I would find comments in all of them referring to how challenging previous budgets had been. However, it's no exaggeration to state for the record that this year we have faced the most testing financial situation that this council has ever experienced. This year's Scottish Government settlement has been dire. Despite record funding from the UK Government, members are well aware that COSLA has written to the Scottish Government on several occasions to voice the significant concerns of every local authority, including this one, regarding a totally inadequate budget provision given to local government this year. While some additional funding was found belatedly, and I hear what has been said about a so-called increase in funding, however, the ring fencing of sizable proportions of our budget or earmarking of extra monies for pay awards has meant that the burden of cuts has fallen disproportionately on a smaller section of our council services and staff. Despite these exceptionally challenging circumstances, I'm pleased to present the budget amendment on behalf of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Group. During our 5 years in administration, we put the people of Perth and Kinross at the heart of our budget decision making and produced budgets which had a positive impact for our population and which built on our key priorities of education and families, economic well-being, communities, the environment and infrastructure, and supporting the vulnerable. This year, we will continue to build on these priorities within the framework of the Council's corporate plan. We recognise the impact which the current economic situation is having on people and families. In the past, the Conservative administration invested significantly in tackling poverty, and we fully support those measures which strengthen anti-poverty initiatives, such as the £300,000 investment to support the work of the Anti-Poverty Task Force. To back this up, we will invest a further £250,000 in food security to help sustain the many invaluable food initiatives which provide support to those who are finding the current cost of living a serious challenge. We will also invest in a further two areas, with £20,000 to help with school clothing grants and a £50,000 contribution to a community kitchen project in partnership with the very successful social enterprise Giraffe. This project will develop a training programme for individuals and families which will improve their cooking skills and reduce food waste, whilst building confidence and experience and promoting better well-being. The impact of climate change is being felt across Perth and Kinross and is often experienced by our residents through increased flooding on our roads and in our streets. In addition to rejecting the £50,000 cut to the flooding risk management budget and reversing a proposed £73,000 cut to road gully cleaning, we propose to invest a further £100,000 in each of the next 3 years on additional gully cleaning. This will maximise the removal of surface water at times of heavy rain and maintain our roads network in the considerably improved road condition level in which the last Conservative administration left it. We acknowledge the benefit provided in our rural communities by the Visitor Ranger Service over the last 2 summers, when parts of our area experienced significant visitor management issues. We propose to extend the 2-year pilot by 1 further year to monitor these visitor issues now we are exiting from the pandemic restrictions, and to operate this service between April and October. Our budget also recognises the valuable work and support undertaken by community resilience groups in dealing with emergency situations such as severe weather events and power outages. Our £20,000 investment is aimed at further improving community resilience and helping them to prepare and respond when needed. Last year, we invested further in our Skills Passport programme aimed at assisting people back into work. The scheme provides financial assistance for items such as a training course or piece of equipment. The programme has proved to be successful, and we will invest a further £150,000 in each of the next 2 years for its continuation. The microgrant scheme will be revamped as a small business grant scheme using the earmarked reserve of £150,000 previously allocated to microgrants. The new scheme will provide grants of up to £5,000 with a maximum contribution of 75% from the council. It will be open to small businesses employing up to 10 people, and I am confident that this opportunity for small businesses will be welcomed, especially in the current climate. Fly tipping is a scourge on the environment, and as well as being unsightly and dangerous, is costly for the council and private landowners to clear up. Therefore, we again propose to invest in a fly tipping fund with an allocation of £30,000 to assist landowners to clean up materials illegally dumped on their property. We also propose to invest in enforcement of fly tipping with £100,000 of resourcing over 2 years to recruit a dedicated fly tipping enforcement officer. They will tackle fly tipping activities, ensure our fly tipping surveillance cameras are deployed to their full use, and identify and pursue offenders to the full force of our powers. Last year, the Conservative administration provided continued support for an Adapt Your Property initiative, which again proved very successful. This initiative helps to convert vacant commercial properties either into residential accommodation or to repurpose them for an alternative commercial use. Previous funds for this proposal have been oversubscribed, and we will invest a further £300,000 in this initiative. We have rejected the proposals to close the attended public toilets in Blairgowrie, Auchterarder, Perth and Crieff this coming year, and propose to invest £25,000 in a review of staffed public toilets to see if there is a more cost-effective way of providing the facilities in these areas. Our city and town centre economies continue to face difficult times. We are proposing an increase in the free parking period from 15 minutes to 20 minutes, which will have little or no effect on our income, but provide a better parking opportunity for both shoppers and retailers. This council has always sought to uphold the high standards of education, which we are rightly proud of in Perth and Kinross. Unfortunately, the recent teacher strikes over their unresolved pay claim have impacted heavily on all our pupils, but more so on those within Perth and North Perthshire. These strikes have resulted in savings for the council, and accordingly, we will use some of these funds to enable our children and young people to achieve their full potential by investing in 3 key areas. We are investing £50,000 of these strike savings in providing targeted study support for those pupils who have been most disadvantaged by the disruption. We are also proposed to invest £120,000 to continue the work of our youth engagement team and continue the support for our youth outreach programme. Thirdly, there are an increasing number of first languages being spoken both by our school pupils and by their parents. We welcome the increasing diversity, but also recognise the communication challenges which this situation brings. Accordingly, we will invest £50,000 in providing translation tools, software and equipment to assist teachers and school staff to be able to communicate more effectively with all pupils and parents. Over and above these investments, we've rejected the proposed cuts to our school crossing patrollers, swimming lessons, virtual campus, education psychologists and devolved school management budgets. We've also rejected cuts to the school-based music instruction and full cost recovery for our central groups and music camps. Incidents of domestic abuse have increased as a result of both the COVID pandemic and the current economic situation. Similarly, instances of sexual violence and abuse have increased significantly in the last decade. Consequently, I'm pledging a commitment to support the work of Women's Aid and RASAC of £120,000 each, spread over the next 3 years. Partnership working is key to our ongoing success as a council, and this has been reflected in the dedicated and committed work we undertake with our colleagues in health and social care. Consequently, we are pleased to support proposals to pass on all of the additional £7.8 million funding for social care to our Health and Social Care Partnership to ensure support for our most vulnerable residents. Members are well aware of the current situation with regards to mental and physical health among men and women of all ages. The NUC provides vital support for people suffering from mental health crisis. Due to funding difficulties, the NUC will be unable to maintain a 24/7 service going forward. This is a flagship multi-agency one-stop crisis centre which provides a safe haven and immediate support at a time of mental health crisis. We will therefore provide £150,000 during 23-24 to allow the NUC to maintain its 24/7 operation. The Lighthouse provides crisis support for young people aged 12 years or over who are at risk of self-harm or suicide. This organisation works in partnership with our Education and Children's Services, providing a variety of school outreach programmes. We have also committed £150,000 towards supporting their work, especially at a time when young people are under immense pressure, and will use funds from the savings made as a result of the teacher strikes to fund this proposal. Further funding of £50,000 will support the mental health and wellbeing work of community groups such as Mindspace and the Women's Wellbeing Clinic. Provost, Perth Kinross is not alone in facing significant financial challenges, and each of our ALIOs have similarly had to consider significant cuts in order to balance their budgets. Accordingly, we have rejected the 4% cut to their contract fees in each of the next 3 years. Within Culture PK, proposed cuts included the closure this year of 7 public libraries with the lowest footfall in Alyth, Comrie, Pitlochry, Auchterarder, Cooperangus, Burnham and North Inch. We wish to see library facilities retained in these locations and have invested £173,000 next year for Culture PK to keep them open. We've also invested a further £50,000 next year to examine the redesign of library service in these areas to explore more cost-effective ways to provide library services going forward. Live Active Leisure proposed a number of significant cuts to services, including the closure of Perth Leisure Pool from 1st September this year and the Dewar Centre from the 1st of July. We recognise that these facilities are expensive to operate and have proposed funding of £350,000 and £360,000 respectively in order to keep both facilities fully open during 2023-24. Further savings from the ALIOs are possible, and we have committed £50,000 of funding to explore the sharing of back office services across the 3 organisations. Excuse me. The previous Conservative administration implemented the Community Investment Fund, which has proved exceptionally successful and popular with our communities, funding local projects addressing inequalities in our 12 council wards. Almost £2 million has been distributed through this fund over the last 5 years, and we propose to commit a further £400,000 to the fund next year. The Kinross Local Committee was established as a pilot, and the report on the outcome of the pilot is due later this year. In order to maintain the committee until that time, we've allocated a further £20,000 for the cost of administering the committee and another £20,000 for members to use to support local projects. Bloom groups and Friends of Cemetery groups achieve amazing results in our towns and city and in many of our cemeteries across Perth and Kinross. We wish to acknowledge the excellent work of these voluntary groups, firstly by rejecting the proposed cut to their funding, and secondly by providing additional support of £40,000 in 23-24. This will allow us to build upon the highly successful and visible initiatives that are already benefiting our residents, visitors and the environment. Perth and Kinross Council recently achieved the gold standard in terms of its support for our Armed Forces Covenant, Bailey Ahern, himself an Armed Forces veteran and our Armed Forces champion, puts in a tremendous effort in support of the Covenant on our collective behalf, and we propose a small budget allocation of £5,000 to assist with the operation of this work. Road maintenance is an area where Scottish Conservatives have invested record amounts in the last 2 years and have seen significant improvements in the road condition levels in Perth and Kinross as a result. This year, we have rejected the proposed cuts in the Road Maintenance Partnership reactive maintenance budget and cuts to the staffing of our traffic and road safety resources and to a traffic accident and investigation budget. We've also rejected proposals to remove all street sweepers and replace them with mechanical sweeping alternatives. In addition, we have also rejected savings on our winter maintenance budget, which would have removed the clearing of ice and snow from our footpaths out with normal working hours, reduced our Category 1 road snow clearance by 20% and increased the time taken to grit a Category 1 road from 2 to 3 hours. We are proposing significant investment in our footpaths and veg cutting operations with a revenue funding commitment that will allow us to borrow £500,000 to improve our footpaths network next year. We will also make a commitment of £60,000 towards an additional cut of all roadside verges, and this will be added to the additional £1 million which we have already invested in our road, bridges and infrastructure for next year. Many of our communities have invested in community action plans for their area, consulting with their community on their priorities and identifying a list of ways in which they want to see their communities improve and thrive. We propose allocating £200,000 towards supporting communities with action plans, allowing them to bid for funds to support their priorities and help them make these priorities a reality. Thank you. Within the public transport budget, some services require considerable subsidies per journey to support their retention. Many of these costs are not viable, and as a result, we propose an investment of £100,000 towards community transport initiatives to help communities find a cheaper and better solution to local transport issues. The Conservative administration's prudent approach in last year's budget left £8.2 million in the COVID-19 earmarked reserve, when some other political groups were determined to virtually deplete that fund last year. Thank goodness for our decision, as these monies have been extremely helpful in determining our budgets this year, helping to close the budget gap, providing finance towards our vital transformation programme and assisting the work of the Children, Young People and Family Services to manage the ongoing impact of COVID-19 and reduce the number of residential care placements. And finally, Provost, our careful and considered approach to this year's budget has allowed us to keep the council tax level to a below inflation increase of 4%, equal to some of the lowest rates so far approved by the Scottish Local Authority. In finishing, I'd like to record my personal thanks and those of my Scottish Conservative colleagues to all the officers and the senior management team who provided support to the budget review groups, and to take this opportunity to express our thanks to our staff who continue to work tirelessly to support our residents and communities in the most difficult of circumstances. Provost, this budget invests in our children and families, it invests in our economic well-being, it invests in our communities, it invests in our environment and infrastructure, and it provides support for the most vulnerable in our society. It also minimises the financial impact on all our households with a below inflation increase in council tax. On behalf of my Scottish Conservative colleagues, I commend this budget amendment to the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I would like to invite Councillor Smith to second the Conservative Group budget. Deputy Provost, how long does Councillor Smith have? You have 1 minute, Councillor Smith.
Don't worry, this will be very short. You'll be glad to know that I won't be getting involved in any name slagging. It's not the time or the place, and I'm just happy to second this amendment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. I would now like to invite Councillor Colin Stewart to move the independent group amendment.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost. Provost, Bailey's councillors, I am pleased to present the first budget of the independent group in this new council term for consideration by you all. First of all, I must just say that my heartfelt thanks go out to all of the officers who've supported us in this process, led more than ably by our Chief Accountant, Mr. Walker. In bringing this budget before you, we have had four major principles in mind. The need to accelerate the need to support the excellent work that goes on in the third sector and by passionate, committed volunteers in our communities. The need for the council to transform and become more efficient over time. The need to protect frontline services. And finally, the need to think about the future beyond the one-year spending we receive from the government, beyond the three-year window of this budget process, and indeed beyond the five-year cycle of a council term. Officers have, of course, brought forward their proposals for extra spending and new savings in the council budget. We have been robust in challenging the extra spending and so reject over £3 million of additional spending over the 3 years, particularly in relation to inflationary assumptions around the price of energy. More importantly, we reject £7.75 million worth of savings that we fear would be unpalatable to the residents and taxpayers of Perth Kinross. To highlight a few examples, we reject the proposed cut to mobile toilets that support community events. We reject most of the proposed saving in grant funding to Pitlochry Festival Theatre, which I understand receives the least grant funding of any theatre in Scotland, but does so much to boost the local economy. We reject the proposed cuts to primary school swimming lessons. In an area like Perth and Kinross, with such a number of scenic rivers and lochs, we consider swimming to be a key life skill for our young people. And we reject the proposed cuts to both our green space maintenance to keep our public areas and parks looking at their best, and to winter maintenance, which can be so vital when we have icy winters. This is a cut which would fall most heavily on rural areas where most of the population of Perth and Kinross live. And lastly, we reject cuts to the vital public transport services that connect the city and our rural communities, and the traffic and road safety cuts. We also reject. This is probably the #1 issue that fills councillors' email inboxes and is a cut too far for us. Indeed, we propose increasing the budget for road safety overall. In our proposed savings, we have carefully considered which areas we feel that our residents and taxpayers get most demonstrable benefit from. And we have removed a number of legacy budget line items where, for example, the value is limited or there has been no uptake in funding provided in prior years' budgets. Within education and children's services, we have sought to more closely align the spending with the actual projections for pupil numbers and with the time spent by pupils in schools, for example, by cutting the number of cleaning days to the number of days that pupils are actually in school. We also want to expand a current pilot scheme whereby spare capacity and nursery provision is offered to children beyond the 1,140 free hours. And we would set a target in year 3 to generate a saving by a review of Perth City Secondary School capacity, year 3 being the year that the new Perth High School will open. Within corporate and democratic services, we propose some minor savings by withdrawing from COSLA and Scotland Excel. We propose to recognise the change in working patterns and consequently in building usage following the increase in working from home following the pandemic. Puller House and 2 High Street both operate daily significantly below capacity, and with the coming end of the contract in September 2025, there will be the opportunity to realise a full year saving in excess of £3 million at Puller House, while all staff will be able still to be accommodated elsewhere in the council estate, including here at 2 High Street and at Carpenter House. And lastly, in our savings proposals, we challenge officers recognising the hard work that has gone into producing the transformation reviews detailed or commencing the transformation reviews detailed in the papers before us today. But we challenge officers to make particular amounts of savings within how departments are configured. This will require a lot of effort and will need us to review how we do things, not just what we do as a council. We will need to streamline our processes and procedures and remove steps within the bureaucracy of the Council, just as inevitably grows over time in any large organisation. The independent group stands ready to assist in that massive effort in any way we can. Taken together, these measures would produce a saving of £11.5 million over the 3-year period of this budget. Provost members, I turn now to our proposals for extra spending. Top of the list here is a £400,000 continuation of the hugely successful Community Investment Fund, which has done so much in the 5 years since I introduced it, to supporting our communities in developing an astonishing range of creative and innovative projects and to leveraging their goodwill and volunteering efforts and skills. And to further support community spirit and goodwill and bring people together, we propose a Community Events Fund of £120,000 or £10,000 per ward. As I said earlier, we also propose additional road safety staffing and funding for projects of nearly £200,000 per year. We would support our communities further by increasing funding for extra grip bins and by topping up the unadopted roads fund by £100,000. We reject the proposed increases for pitches and parks and also would exempt farmers' markets from road closure charges. We would provide additional funding to the arm's length external organisations in addition to rejecting the proposed cuts of £1 million, and we would do so in order to maintain current levels of service, including rejecting any potential closures of libraries or the mobile library service or rural leisure facilities. As we recover from the pandemic and recognise that while Perth Kinross has high employment levels, it has lower than the average Scottish wage levels, and we therefore propose a £1 million package of business support measures, including funding for GrowBiz of £120,000, £380,000 into micro business grants, and £500,000 into the successful Adapt Your Property Fund. And finally, on our spending proposals, I mentioned in my introduction that we need to look to the longer term as well as at the immediate challenges facing us, and so we propose a recurring budget of £80,000 for continuing and expanding the Breast Buddies programme, which supports new mothers for whom it is appropriate to adopt breastfeeding. This has countless benefits in terms of child and maternal health, infant development over the longer term, and including reducing behavioural issues in school. This is a real spend to save. We want to introduce no wrong door training to make sure that whenever anyone with care needs, whether they be identified or unidentified, comes into contact with council front door services, they can be signposted to any additional help they may need from whichever service it would come. And the last element of those final spending proposals is that we propose to use £250,000 for a Test of Change pilot scheme to mitigate future pressures on social care by offering vitamin D supplementation to our most vulnerable people, such as the housebound or people living in care homes. This could reduce respiratory infection and improve overall health and well-being. And it could be extended to council staff to keep our own most valuable asset healthy. Those proposals total nearly £5 million for the first 2 years, and where they are non-recurring proposals, we propose to fund them from earmarked reserves. In conclusion, we would make changes to invest in our communities, invest in business, and for the future future sustainability of council services. And I'm pleased to say that in the midst of a cost of living crisis, we do so with a proposed council tax rate at just under an average of 2% per year over each of the 3 years. Provost members, I commend this budget to the Chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I'd like to invite Councillor Dave Cuthbert to second the amendment, and Deputy 11 minutes. You have 11 minutes.
Provost, if it's all right, I'd like to do it from the seat. With my dyslexia, it's easier if the papers are in front of me rather than at a distance. Thank you. Provost and members, before I begin, I want to say a big thank you to all the officers who've helped us through this process. We've been putting them through quite a lot of hard work. And I want to particularly pick out Scott Walker, who has done a huge amount of work and has been working day and night to help us over the last week or so. To give you some background, the gap we are trying to fill assumes a £31 million of funding from service concessions. This money will have to be paid back over time. It is my view that the council should not be dependent on this money, and we should move as quickly as possible to not needing it. Our expenditure is exceeding our income, and we are accumulating debt for future generations. Personally, I do not like this. We need to make the council more efficient. Today's proposals from the independent group aims to start that process. I want to be going into future budget processes with headroom to allow us to invest in Perth and Kinross's future. In order to look at the budget, the independent group have carried out a deep dive into the council's finances. Some of you have joined us on that part of the journey. It's been fascinating, and it's been a real journey of discovery, for which, again, thanks to the officers. The principles that we've applied looking at the removal of silo working. So, for example, we've suggested combining the roles of parking wardens, dog fouling officers, safer community officers, and visitor ranger roles. They don't need to be discrete services, and people can do both jobs or several jobs at the same time. We've been looking at sweating our assets more by using assets in a multi-purpose way. For example, can we put public libraries into rural primary schools? We've been looking at the disposal of non-productive, non-core assets, and as Councillor Stewart's mentioned, we propose to vacate Puller House as soon as possible, as it costs a huge amount of money. We've been looking at the flattening of management structures. We believe that we should have chiefs being removed, not Indians. The majority of the staff cuts put forward in the executive summary are lower paid, which means we're leading to service cuts. My personal view is that there should be a maximum of 6 management layers between the chief executive and the lowest paid worker. Putting democracy at the heart of our communities is another focus we put onto our budget. So the Kinross Local Committee is working and can be rolled out to other areas. And so far we've suggested that they should be rolled out to Strathern, Strathmore and Highland. We've also been looking for new income streams and funding. So for example, why do we not seek philanthropic funding for breakfast clubs? Why not charge for Broxton Park and Ride? Perhaps provide a free bus trip into the city on the back of the ticket. The buses are running anyway, and the marginal cost to us would be negligible. We should perhaps look at getting Walnut Grove delivered quicker, as we can do the same thing at Walnut Grove. We've also focused on spend to save initiatives. So spend some money now to save in the future. I mean, I ask, why not? We've proposed spending £500,000 in year 1 on modern apprentice and trainee employment initiatives. The scheme has huge benefits for all in the future years, and we think it should in the longer term lead to overhead savings. In our budget, we've rejected 7 pressures. Some because we think external funding should be sought, some because energy prices have fallen from highs and the pressure put forward by officers has been overtaken by events, some for other reasons, and I won't go into these now. We've also rejected 36 savings, not because we don't think cuts have to be made, but, and it is a big but, some of the savings being proposed have serious consequences. We have tried to identify other savings which are less harmful to the services the council delivers. I won't go over all the items, but a few that we've gone into. The Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust, which is a proposed saving of £100,000. PKHT brings in roughly £900,000 a year in external funding. They're in the process of raising £2.7 million for the renovation of Stanley Mills, and they carry out all sorts of community activities such as Doors Open Days. So my view is that this is a false economy. We've rejected the school-based music instruction and music camps because music is hugely important to children. A lot of people like myself, children like me when I was a child, have disabilities like dyslexia, and music can actually bring those people into the school community and they feel less alienated by it. We've looked at the reduction in community campus opening times. That was a proposal to save 150,000. In essence, in Kinross, the only council-owned property apart from other schools is the campus. So to treat it like a school and close it in the evening, you're basically taking that asset away from the community. We've rejected the road traffic and safety officer cuts, and as Councillor Stewart has mentioned, we've proposed an increase. In our ward, road safety is the single biggest issue that we get fed to us by communities all the time, and it is a critical asset, a critical item that we need to spend, not just what we have been spending, but more money to clear the backlog of lists. We've rejected the public transport proposed cuts. Basically, public transport is not a luxury, it's an essential. The Anti-Poverty Task Force has already identified that public transport is a key issue to tackling poverty. So to take a cut would mean fewer bus services, and obviously that would impact on those who could least afford to lose them. We've also spent a lot of time, looking for new savings, and I see one or two grins on the officers' faces. As I say, we've done a deep dive into all the management budgets. We've had a look trying to see what we can find. And in our budget, there are 38 proposed savings. It would take me hours to go through each of these, and I don't think we've got hours, so I won't. There's a number of questions that have come out of this deep dive. There's things like, do we have a view on what the revised local plan should cost? As Councillor Stewart has mentioned, do we think schools should be cleaned when there are no children in them? Should we be looking to allow ineligible children to use spare capacity in our nurseries? And there's a number of other things that have come out of that research, which hopefully we'll deal with in the future. So should we be looking to stop using service concessions to balance our books? And I think the answer to that is that we should be. The only way to do this is cut our expenditure and or increase our income. Looking at the income stream, our main source of funding is from the block grant from the Scottish Government, which is determined by the Scottish Government's Green Book. The Council currently doesn't focus or have anybody focus on the Green Book, but in the Act, it does allow for COSLA to actually influence what is used as a criterion for measuring the amounts of grants that are given through the Green Book. For example, some of the 23-24 funding streams are based on 2011 census estimates. Our population is increasing at roughly double the national average, so that this measure will actually reduce how much we should be getting. So we need to look at bringing pressure on changing some of the criterion used in the Green Book. In terms of new spending proposals, we've listed quite a few of these, as Councillor Stewart's mentioned. I'll just focus on a couple. The first one, of course, is the additional road safety officers. We put £74,000 into this as we believe it's absolutely essential to catch up with the list of outstanding work and actually try and get to the end of it. Community events. Now, some might say that spending money on community events is frivolous. I would actually argue very strongly against that. Community events create a sense of community and lead to communities getting together to solve their own problems. This can actually lead to delivering on Perth and Kinross offer, thereby saving the council money and actually improving what we do. And as I've already mentioned, we've also proposed the extension to local community, the local committees to include Highland, Strathern and Strathmore. The Kinross local committee is starting to work, and in my view, it will lead to community empowerment, which again can lead to communities getting together to deliver their own solutions to the problems, and it helps to deliver on the Perth and Kinross offer. If you want any more information on any of these proposals, just ask us. Thank you for your time, and thank you again to all the staff who have assisted us in preparing our budget proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. I'd now like to invite Councillor Peter Barrett to move the Liberal Democrat amendment. Councillor Barrett, your microphone is not switched on.
Thank you very much for that, Provost. Some people might have preferred it that way. Firstly, I'd like to thank officers for their support through the budget review process in providing the support and detail of the impacts of the saving proposals and for their assistance in helping us flesh out our new spending proposals to deliver on our political priorities. Provost, as others have said, this is the hardest budget that I've had to face in 20 years as a councillor. It's something that I stressed to John Swinney whilst lobbying for more funding for local government along with other council leaders, and I'm grateful for the support of our council leader in making those representations. Unfortunately, despite all councils facing record inflation, increasing demand, increasing complexity of demand, and in the teeth of a cost of living crisis causing real hardship in our communities, local government were once again left out in the cold in the makeweights of the Scottish Government's budget. We have pressures of 31 million and we only got 6 million from the Scottish Government, plus more responsibilities and fewer flexibilities. And sadly, I haven't heard a single word from any of the candidates to be our next First Minister about what they will do to reverse the financial crisis that councils face. My Scottish Liberal Democrat group and I have tried to make the best of a bad deal for Perth and Kinross. We've tried to protect our citizens from the worst of the savings proposals that we've been forced to consider. We've also tried to balance the need for this council to raise more revenue with the pressures facing local households. So we're proposing a 4.75 council tax rise for next year, 23-24, and for each of the 2 subsequent years in these provisional budgets. Any less than that, Provost, does not recognise the severe pressures that this council faces and the medium-term financial challenges in both revenue and capital. Some might say that 4.75 doesn't go far enough. In our budget, we put forward several proposals specifically to ramp up this council's response to the shocking incidents of child poverty in our communities. We want to target scarce resources at those most in need. We're aiming to tackle child poverty and start to get the number of children, the 5155 children in poverty, if not more, kids living in poverty, and to get that number down, and not just in isolated geographical pockets, but across the whole of Perth and Kinross. And that's why we've identified 2 big changes in our budget. The first is to target £300,000 worth of recurring monies into targeted employability support for the parents of families in poverty. And that will be tailored support delivered by the council cohort of key workers, continuing the excellent existing practice and building on the work and funding for the employability partnership and no one left behind funding. The second big move is to ensure that the locality-based work to tackle child poverty is delivered at scale and at pace. And that needs project management and coordination support to ensure that it is delivered in all our localities and not just 1 or 2. This funding will enable the council to lead and drive that locality-based work to identify the children and families at a locality level and mobilising and organising support to those parents and families through better coordination of all the specialist practitioners based in our localities. And again, I want to stress that it's about doing it at a whole authority scale and not just in 1 or 2 local pilot localities. And that's essential if we're going to eliminate child poverty in Perth and Kinross by 2030 and no longer bear the stigma of knowing that there are more than 5,155 children living in poverty in our area. We have reinstated the savings amounting to 3.339 million on reducing the primary school week to 22.5 hours and with regard to the 33-period week in secondary schools in 25-26. We have taken advice that this is competent. We haven't altered the timing or the implementation of these savings so that the proper consultation with parents and unions can be carried out. We have projected education in our children's futures with a raft of other rejected savings in our budget proposals, including savings in early learning and childcare staffing, central education staff, education psychology staff, and school-based music instruction. And Bailey McLaren will say more about this in her seconding of our amendment. But you cannot simply latch on to teaching hours as being the sole measure by which the quality and effectiveness of the development of our young people to their full potential is judged. And rather than arbitrarily locking all local authorities into the status quo, where we already have primary schools operating a 22.5-hour week in Edinburgh and East Lothian, if the Scottish Government has empirical evidence to demonstrate that there is an optimal number of weekly contact hours, then it should publish that evidence and fund that number of hours, and not reach for the big stick to club councils into submission on teacher numbers. We are firmly of the view that it is up to local councils to determine how best to manage the delivery of education in our schools and how to achieve the best outcomes for our young people. We are pleased to support provision of the National Living Wage on agency contracts and the Foundation Living Wage as part of our commitment to fair work and tackling poverty, and to uprate our foster and kinship carer fee payments. Perth Kinross Council has a strong record of supporting young people into work and developing their essential work experience and skills. And we want that to continue, and to support the in-house development of young talent who will form the next generation of council officers. And that's why we're fully reinstating the saving number 10 and will not be accepting the removal of the Modern Apprentice scheme, and will instead be continuing to invest £900,000 over the next 3 years to continue to attract and employ graduates and modern apprentices. Provost, I don't want anyone to think that our budget has overlooked the conditions of Gypsy traveller community in our area. I welcomed the award of grant funding from the Scottish Government, which will support the council to replace all the chalets at the Double Dyke site, and was pleased to move for the better preferred option for the transit site at Arran Road, which has gained all party support. We have taken the decision to fund the transit site through £2 million worth of spare capacity in the capital programme, and we'll deal with that in the next item. Provost, I am disturbed to see in the SNP's proposed budgets proposals to cut the single person's council tax discount, and find that is hard to reconcile and square with tackling the cost of living crisis. And I had hoped for more from this administration than a dash to the bottom on council tax in a contest with the Conservatives. In conclusion, we're proposing a 4.75% increase in council tax for 23-24, and the same increase for the provisional budgets of 24-25 and 25-26. That will deliver a budget of £447,788,000 for this council, and a Band D council tax of £1,415.12, an increase of £1.23 a week. Our budget will help tackle poverty, it will help to tackle child poverty, it will support the most vulnerable in our communities into housing and through the cost of living crisis, and it will support our young people in education and into employment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Lang, I will allow you to make your point of clarification now.
Thanks, Provost. And it's just to clarify for Councillor Barrett that I think he's misunderstood the single occupancy. It's not the removal of the single occupancy. It's for officers to, as they do a review every 3 years, but that's been held up by COVID, that they go and check that everybody who is claiming the single occupancy rebate is actually living alone. They ask people to come forward voluntarily, and the saving is that normally in previous times that this review has been taken out, it finds that 3% of the people claiming the single occupancy are not actually entitled to it. So it will certainly not be removing any people who are entitled to single occupancy. So I just thought I'd want to clear that up for the press and others within the room, that it would certainly not be a proposal from the SNP administration. So I hope that clears things up.
Grateful for that clarification, Provost.
Thank you. Bailey McLaren, I would like to invite you to second the Liberal Democrat amendment.
Thank you, Provost. I'm delighted to second the Scottish Liberal Democrats budget motion. As Councillor Peter Barrett has stated, difficult and challenging choices have been made in order to reach a budget which will still protect our most vulnerable, continue to reduce inequalities, protect the environment, support young people, our future, and deliver fairness. To do so, we have rejected the proposed cuts to housing and homeless support. The range of proposed cuts would have a direct impact on any individual's basic human right to access a safe, healthy and secure living environment. To have to consider these options is a travesty brought to our desks by the continual erosion of funding of local government by the SNP Green Scottish Government. To cut the modern apprentice scheme would impact our youth, their aspirations of a positive future. Youth do not deserve to be put to one side. They deserve nurture, mentoring, opportunities to gain skills and ultimately shine. The proposals of cuts which would directly affect communities are cuts that again are shameful to be contemplating. The impacts on road safety, winter maintenance, pothole infilling, green space maintenance and infrastructure would be clear to see. Communities are the heart of Perth and Kinross, and they deserve more, not less. Supporting children and young people to achieve their full potential is not cutting swimming lessons, school crossing patrollers, educational psychology capacity, school-based music tuition, early learning and childcare staffing, and reducing school management budgets. Transformation of our services and delivery of them is a project we are supportive of, challenging as it is, and we are confident of positive outcomes. Our budget proposals are centred around communities, protection of the most vulnerable, supporting the 5,155 children living in poverty in Perth and Kinross and their families to improve their everyday lives and give hope of better futures, targeting parental employability of parents of children living in poverty, a proposal which has the potential to bring a real difference and long-lasting positive effects. Intensive housing support approach, which would support residents with complex housing needs experiencing homelessness. This will complement our successful rapid rehousing approach, delivering more tailored supports for people experiencing homelessness, whose complex support needs require more intensive wraparound support. Intensive housing support, I'm repeating myself there. The proposed tenancy support fund would be a benefit to those tenants in private rental tenancies, helping to avoid homelessness. Despite the expanding stock of social housing, tenancy demand is greater than our ability to meet. Having a confident private rental sector is important for our residents. Community Investment Fund is a fund from which all areas of Perth and Kinross have benefited. SIF awards are part of the story in giving communities the chance to flourish. A successful Liberal Democrat legacy, one we want to see maintained. Our proposal to support Women's Aid and Rape Advice Scotland Access Centre is a support to the most vulnerable who are experiencing crisis. No more words are needed to explain this one. Glenfarg Community Transport Group, a wonderful example of a community-driven project, one which has the potential to be replicated in other locations of Perth and Kinross, and we want to give it the resource and encouragement to extend it beyond a pilot project. To conclude, the Liberal Democrat Group budget is one that contains our priorities and aspirations for residents of Perth and Kinross, and is one that is reflective of the Perth and Kinross offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McLaren. I'd now like to invite Bailey Bailey to move the Labour Group amendment.
Thank you, Chamber. Thank you, Provost. This budget is our residents' last line of defence against the savage cuts that will otherwise be meted out by the failed politics we've seen over recent years. We in Labour refuse to ask officers of this council to manage decline any longer. We refuse to use this budget to simply decide which group to harm most from some macabre list of cuts. We are asking officers to grow the services we offer to those whose need is the greatest. Today, only this budget asks officers to start to rebuild capacity for our residents. Today, this amendment funds officers to go ahead and invest too. Firstly, deliver a new swimming pool for Perth, which we'd be able to take a dip in already today if it wasn't for previous political procrastination. Secondly, grow the education budgets for our most vulnerable and underprivileged children by spending the strike underspends wholly within education. Thirdly, fix the buses so that we break out of this terminal cycle of cut, bailout, cut, bailout, cut, bailout, and I could continue. On PH2O, we're showing how this pool is indeed affordable even at the new price tag. The current pool is just not big enough to serve Perth's expanded population and renewed appetite for leisure. It is time to be bold and fully back the PH2O project to create a positive landmark destination for Perth. The new swimming pool has already been given the go-ahead, but councils will consider its future again at today's meeting. Delayed decision-making and funding struggles have already massively increased the projected build cost, and any further hold-up would be disastrous. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Gordon Curry, president of Perth Swimming Club. You've all had those and more in your inboxes this morning to reflect on. Just last September, the climate-destroying Crosstay Link Road came asking for over £30 million of additional funding and got it. The pool needs an extra £20 million to help boost health and well-being and is being asked to wait. In Labour, we say now is the time for the new pool, not some future date to be defined. So you'll see our revenue budget reflects the additional funding necessary to start building the pool as soon as possible. On the buses, it's a crying shame, but anecdotal evidence suggests that ridership is well down not only on pre-COVID levels, but also on the levels prior to the recent driver shortages. The current model of the council subsidising the less lucrative parts of the network, while private operators can take what profit they want from the rest, is fundamentally broken. The focus on the passenger has gone. The competition that Mrs. Thatcher envisioned at the time of deregulation has failed to materialise here. There is an abject market failure to the level that I wonder whether even the more conservative members of the Conservative benches might be starting to feel a little awkward when residents complain about the buses. That's why this budget not only protects the existing service, but sets aside over £300,000 for a full scoping exercise, then business plan, to figure out what the right public interest model is for the future of the buses in our area. That might be franchising, public ownership, or some other model. What's for sure is that the goal will be to create a public transport network that achieves on the goal of providing a real alternative to private car ownership. Last year, the budget that I brought forward with now Provost McDade and the Independents showed how there was scope to invest in insulation and energy security. The Independent Group and I could see that there was a storm coming, and the cheapest energy is the energy you don't need to use in the first place. Sadly, those proposals were not accepted by this council, and as a result, this year, we as a council face soaring energy bills, as do our residents. However, it's not too late to change. This budget maintains that contribution to community and cooperative energy projects and adds £2 million to improve insulation for our council housing stock. We'll also bring down the cost of housing by accelerating buybacks from their existing levels. It is a travesty that some people in my ward find themselves paying double the rent of their neighbour because their identical home is rented from a private landlord. Even the late Mrs. Thatcher might wince when I say now that her right to buy scheme has, in 2023, become a right to exploit. Bringing down housing costs is just the start of addressing the root causes of poverty. This budget also includes significant investment in employability, rejects the apprenticeship cuts, and funds officers to figure out how we can create a more affordable housing in rural areas and our city centre. But we can't solely focus on the root causes of poverty. We have to also focus on the very real consequences. There's money in this budget for the food bank and to make the breakfast free in our breakfast clubs. That's right, we're not only saving the breakfast clubs, we're making the breakfast free. In Perth, we failed to mend the roof when the weather was good, and as a result, we're having to do it while the rain is on. So yes, there's a moderate tax increase in this budget. However, this amendment is fully balanced for all 3 years. Yep, that's right. The gaps of 1.7 million and 3.1 million are closed, and it's the only amendment or motion on the table today that achieves that. This budget shows us our destinies in our own hands. It shows that if we're ready to take hard political choices, we can invest in education, in well-being and in housing, and start to tackle the root causes of poverty. Rebuilding can start here and can start today. Thank you, Provost. I commend this to the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. I'd like to invite Councillor Leishman to second the Labour Group amendment.
Thank you, Provost, and good afternoon, councillors. To start with, I would like to add my thanks to council officers for their hard work during this budget process. Their knowledge, expertise and professionalism were matched by their patience at fielding the many questions I had. I very much appreciate the job that they do. As this is my first budget, I watched recordings of previous meetings. I wanted to get a feel for the ebb and flow of how things went. And what struck me was how party political the proceedings were. That may seem an odd thing to say, as this is council after all, and as you all know, I have been very vocal in my own political beliefs in these chambers since being elected last May. But today, I'm going to speak differently. Local authorities are the primary providers of local services, and over the last decade we have seen the power of councils diminish. Cuts and underfunding negatively impact on what services we can provide to our residents. I know this is a shared issue for councillors and council officers, and in spite of underfunding and austerity, the skill and sense of duty from our council frontline workers have been the reasons for us not being overwhelmed. Just under a year on from being elected, I have experienced the full range of emotions. Delight at achieving positive outcomes for residents, to despair at some of the stories I've heard and living situations I've seen. Somewhere in between delight and despair there is frustration. Frustration that councillors are somewhat limited in what we can do, and I know that councillors of all political affiliations are familiar with that feeling. And while we have different political beliefs, I know that establishing working relationships is vital. My fellow ward colleagues and I have different views on certain issues, but what we appreciate is the need for communication, collaboration and cooperation, because that is what the people in our ward need and deserve. All 40 of us are here to serve not only our own ward, but collectively all 12 wards. We represent people, not inflexible political doctrines or dogmas. We are all aware of the underfunding from the Scottish Government, but today is not the day for political grandstanding or finger pointing. The day for criticising what we are given by Holyrood will come, and the criticisms aimed at the government will be just and fair, but that is not the business of today. Because today we have the opportunity to show that we are worthy of our elected positions by having a robust debate and not a petty squabble like we see so often in Holyrood and Westminster, the sorts of which turn people off from politics and do very little to meaningfully help improve their circumstances. Our Perth Kinross Labour Group budget acknowledges the realities of where we are. Local authorities are in decline, but the onus is on us. We are not here to manage this decline, but to turn things around. From the outset of preparing this budget, Bailey and I asked each other two questions. Number one, what are the hopes, needs and aspirations of people in Perth and Kinross? And number two, what can we do to improve the lives of people all over our region? The first theme of our budget I'm speaking to is on poverty and inequality. Britain is considered to be a rich country, but more accurately, we are an unequal country. And there is persuasive evidence in Perth and Kinross to give credibility to that statement. In the last few months of BRG meetings, I have seen a lot of numbers and a lot of bits of paper, but certain numbers stick in my mind. 5,155 is one of those. That's the number of children we have living in poverty across our communities. For some children, going to school not only provides them with an education, it provides them with a meal. And waiting until lunchtime to get your first meal of the day means that the morning has been nothing but a battle against hunger. We will remove the £2 per breakfast charge to give free breakfast to kids where clubs are present, and we propose that feeding the stomach is the way to feeding the mind and give children the best start to their school day. We also know that the various strands of poverty and inequalities are interconnected. And as the Labour Group member on the Anti-Poverty Task Force, I regularly think about some other numbers. 24,000. That's the number of workers we have in Perth and Kinross that are in low-paid employment. And 13,000. That's the number of workers we have that don't get paid the living wage. Often these statistics mean that many of our young people will have to leave our area in search of better paid work. This exodus means that local firms miss out on young talent that would improve their business. Our shared economy is also negatively impacted. Shops, pubs, restaurants and retail offerings is also affected. If we lose our own people, then we will never achieve making Perth and Kinross the home, never mind the destination we want it to be. So the Labour group here are committed to employment support by investing a combined £200,000 in additional funds to the following programmes: No One Left Behind, the Young Persons Guarantee and the Rural Employment Incentive. Our budget will also provide £100,000 for an inequalities fund to allow the council or third sector organisations to run projects that tackle financial insecurity. As we emerge from the global health pandemic, our residents are now dealing with an economic catastrophe, misleadingly called the cost of living crisis. We know that the cost of living crisis is not a force of nature, and it's certainly not a single issue either. It has, however, magnified the fact that we have a new strata of society, the in-work poor. Generally, it used to be that the predictor of whether you were going to be poor was if you were employed or not. Now, the majority of households living in poverty have at least one worker in them. With the serious issue of people falling into or seeing their debt escalate, we will provide £30,000 of funding every year over the next 3 years to the Citizens Advice Bureau. Food banks show the very best of society. Often run by volunteers, they are an example of community spirit, of compassion, kindness and understanding that inequality is unnatural and wrong. In 2010, there were 40,000 Britons using a food bank, and today there are over 3 million. We all need food, out of necessity and for pleasure. It's as fundamental to individuals as it is to society as a whole. There is no justifiable reason why anyone should go hungry. So our budget commits £40,000 to the food bank in Perth. As well as a person's right to food, Perth and Kinross Labour are certain that it is a person's unequivocal right to shelter. Barriers to people accessing housing continue to contribute to housing inequality. Housing inequality is not just the result of market forces, but rather a consequence of deliberate policies which have protected a market-based approach to housing, rather than being driven by thinking of housing being a right to satisfy people's needs. Perth and Kinross Labour believe that housing is a cornerstone of a green and just society where energy-efficient housing can be used as a way of effectively tackling climate change, creating jobs and provide genuinely affordable and secure housing to alleviate economic stress, as well as protecting people's health and well-being. Our budget commits £3 million to the housing revenue account in order to accelerate the rate of the buyback programme, and as well as this, we will make another £2 million available to the housing revenue account to improve energy efficiency and fuel efficiency for council homes. Another core theme of our budget is education. We in Perth and Kinross deliver education well. This is reflected in the exam results our children have received after the turbulence of the last few years. Our schools are embracing outdoor learning experiences. We are seeing upward trends with once disengaged learners staying on to continue their education and others gaining the skills that help them find their way into further education of the world of work. An appropriate description of education is that it is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. This ignition comes from the quality of teaching staff we have across our region, because teaching is not a job, it's a calling. Teachers inspire our children onto great achievements and in turn improve society. And providing our teaching workforce with the tools to do this is imperative. We commit £250,000 in year 1 and year 2 for support for children and young people with hearing and visual impairment. This funding will support the development of the workforce through providing professional learning and specialist qualifications of both teaching and support staff who work across all establishments to deliver specialist support for children and young people with hearing and/or visual impairment. It will also aid the provision of resources for children and young people with complex needs or a disability. The Labour Group also provides support for vulnerable children and young people with additional support needs or a disability, and the families through third sector delivery, and further development of approaches within schools to improve attendance and address behaviour and enhancement of the skills and tools available to the workforce. This sees £250,000 given in year 1 and year 2. This is from the monies that Perth and Kinross Council didn't pay teachers that are on strike. This is education money and should be spent on education. And education should be a vehicle for the eradication of poverty. Young people being able to lift themselves out of destitution by learning is a fundamental human right. However, our education system is not immune to the inequalities that blight our society. We have a damning poverty-related educational attainment gap. The difference between what children from the poorest areas achieve to those children from the wealthiest is considerably worse than pre-pandemic levels. And to tackle the poverty-related educational attainment gap, the Labour Group will provide additional resources and staff time to be focused on schools where the attainment gap between the poorest and wealthiest backgrounds is the largest. This is £245,000 in year 1 and £62,000 in year 2. We wholly reject the cuts to school crossing patrollers and to swimming lessons. The safety of our children and young people is of the utmost importance, and we don't believe this should either be compromised or debated. Education and swimming lessons provide a nice segue to detail Perth Kinross Labour Group's budget for sport, exercise, fitness and culture. We know that learning doesn't stop when you leave school. We have an excellent cultural offering in Perth Kinross that serves our people fantastically well, and rightly we are proud of it. In the last year, we successfully held the Royal National Mod. Concerts, plays, gigs, displays and conferences all enrich our area. They give a sense of civic pride and they boost our economy. Our alios are vital for us to achieve this. That's why we have a full year one rejection of cutting funding to all our alios and a tapered reduction in year 2 and challenge them to balance their books in year 3. But this is not our only part of our plan to support our alios. Perth and Kinross Labour are committed to providing extra funding to all of them. We appreciate the important role they play in our communities. We have listened to them and we will empower them to continue delivering for everyone in Perth and Kinross. For nearly 35 years, the swimming baths have been a wonderful facility for people from all over Perth and Kinross to enjoy, and the Labour Group shows how the Council can provide the extra £20 million and deliver PH2O. A new modern family-friendly facility is crucial to revitalising our region and re-establishing Perth as a premium visitor destination once again. We campaigned on providing our communities with PH2O, and we have the will and the budget to deliver it. Community safety wardens play an important role in our communities. This cannot be overemphasised as we see Police Scotland resources stretched to near breaking point. The days of the traditional beat Bobby are sadly over. Community safety wardens provide a visible presence of reassurance and authority, and the Perth and Kinross Labour Group will provide another full-time community warden for Perth at a recurring cost of £35,000. We also appreciate the important work both Perthshire Women's Aid and RASAC do in supporting the survivors of abuse and are committed to supporting both organisations with recurring funding of £30,000 each. To finish on, it is time for us to take ownership and responsibility of what we can influence. Choices must be made, and we want to look after the people that are under the most strain and are in the most need. Complaining that we don't have power is just a lack of ambition and will. If councils pretend that we don't have any in order to hide our own inadequacies, then our people will inevitably suffer. The only way to prevent that from happening is to harness and exercise the power, ambition and will that we do have. Fellow councillors, it is my privilege to second the Perth and Kinross Labour Group budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. Are there any further amendments? No. Okay, members, then we shall take a 2 hours recess and return at 2:15. Thank you.